is going to become the new champion. This is the Mercedes-Benz Virtual GP 2022 season.
After the Degner there. Oh, and some contact there. Oh, that's heavy contact between Isaac and Storm, and he is going to be losing a lot of positions as a result of that. And I'm sure Isaac is going to be a little bit disappointed in himself with that one.
Yeah, it's going to be a long, difficult journey for them, as we've seen, dating all the way back to 2017 is when this all first started. And we've seen how difficult it can be. Some seasons have been longer than others. This isn't, I don't think, the longest season. Certainly not the shortest either for the F1 Esports Series Challengers, but it's going to bring some unique challenges for these guys to have to overcome.
Yeah, a couple of virtual drivers as well there too, of course, in Benjamin Daly, Tiamat Marduk, and Jem Bullock-Bossi. Certainly, Ben Daly is going to be the one that I'm going to be watching, mainly because you can't miss that livery with all those Twitter pictures on it. It is unmissable. You will definitely spot that car in the crowd.
Well, from Germany, we head to Texas in the United States of America, my next guest. One of the voices alongside a previous guest of this show, Chris Buxton, on Virtual GP, and of course, partnering alongside Kieran McGinley on the 2022 F1 Esports Challenger Series. It's my pleasure to welcome along the man himself, Justin Sutton, with his glorious beard. Justin, how are you, buddy? Thanks very much for coming on the show, first of all.
I'm doing great, and thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Now, firstly, Justin, the key question that I ask people is, how did you get bitten by the motorsport bug, whether it be sim racing or real life? We know there's a lot of racing going on in the US, with IndyCar, NASCAR, the Dirt Outlaws, the big monster trucks, Nitro RX out there as well, amongst with other things. How did you get bitten by the bug, buddy?
So I would say most recently it actually happened in 2012. I have a bit of a checkered past with motorsport when it comes to my very early days, as a child and stuff. I always preferred planes over cars, for example, when I was growing up. I was really into, World War II era propeller planes, modern day fighters, all that kind of stuff. But I followed NASCAR, F1, monster trucks, even a little bit, Supercross, all kinds of that stuff when I was little. But I got really serious about it in 2012. And I just so happened to catch the Australian Grand Prix on Sky F1 with Crofty on the mic.
Yep.
And I hadn't seen F1 since 2003 or 2002, something like that. So what I knew of F1 was Michael Schumacher. That was everything I knew about, because it's difficult as an American to get into F1, especially back in the late 90s, early 2000s and stuff like that. Yep. So I got to go to a US Grand Prix at Indy. I saw the occasional race from time to time. I'd see newspaper headlines, those kinds of things. But yeah, it wasn't until 2012 when I saw the Australian Grand Prix. It was very random. I just happened to see that it was on. It wasn't even on live, and I was just like, oh yeah, I'll check it out and see what it's like, and just immediately fell in love. I was like, wow, a lot has changed since I last watched any sort of motorsport, but yeah. I really liked what it had become.
Yeah, I mean, obviously between the 90s, obviously the big fallout with the Indianapolis Grand Prix with 6 cars lining up on the grid with the Michelin issues with the curbs and massive tire failures and all that kind of stuff. Was there any sort of influence that helped you along with that? Was there a family member or a friend that sort of like said, well, maybe you want to check out the F1 Grand Prix in Australia?
No, not with that particular race, but in a way, yes, because my dad was quite into Formula One when he was growing up. My dad was quite old, though. He was in his 40s already when I was born in 1985. So he grew up in the 1940s, so his heroes were completely different, your Clarks and stuff like that, Ascari, etc. So very different sort of generation, and he didn't keep up with modern Formula One. But whenever I asked him about racing and stuff, if I tried to bring up NASCAR with him, he wasn't interested in that. He was much more concerned about Formula One. But yeah, it was more sort of like the 50s and 60s sort of era that he was familiar with. But it was sort of, he didn't really push me into it. It was almost like a subliminal messaging thing throughout the course of my childhood, just hearing things now and again, basically.
Yeah, kind of the sort of subliminal messages that my dad gave to me when I was, well, born in 77, and I grew up with the likes of Prost, Piquet, Patrese, Gerhard Berger, Ayrton Senna, all that jocularity back when F1 was literally at its cutthroat best. The cars were absolute weapons. I still remember Ayrton Senna's opening lap at the European Grand Prix at Donington Park in '93 before he switched to the fateful year in '94, unfortunately. What was the first ever race that you saw trackside, Justin?
That would be the 2002 US Grand Prix. I had been to like monster truck events and smaller things like that, but the first proper, motorsport event was the 2002 US Grand Prix. I was 17 years old at the time. I remember somebody told me Michael Schumacher has already won the championship because, quite late in the season, obviously, the US Grand Prix. And I remember specifically thinking, in my naive 17-year-old brain, thinking, wow, that's nice of him to turn up anyway, even though he's already won the championship. That's great that I get to see him. And I didn't really have a favorite driver or anything like that. I just thought it was really cool to be there. I got to go all around through the infield and stuff like that and explore Indianapolis. I got to hear the V10s, and I got to hear them coming out of the final corner. We had seats up in the bleachers coming off of the banking onto the start-finish straight. And I remember you absolutely needed earplugs. It was a requirement, honestly, because you would pick up some proper ear damage if you didn't have some ear protection of some kind. And I remember one guy there didn't, and he was what was that? A lot of that sort of action going on. But yeah, that was my first one, and I was quite late to it because I as I mentioned, seen some NASCAR as a kid and sort of followed F1 and stuff like that. And as I mentioned, I kind of fell out of love with motorsport and kind of got more into video games just the year after that in 2003. I promise the 2003 US Grand Prix did not play a role in that, purely coincidental.
Exactly.
That happened. But yeah, that's really when I started getting more into Gran Turismo and less watching sport online or on TV at the time.
Good to see that the Forza Horizon 3 posters in the background there with the old computer games reference.
Yep, that's a carryover.
Exactly. It's always good that you can translate something from the virtual world into a passion in real life, which crosses that great divide through the barrier that has been very, very much blurred over the last couple of years, obviously with COVID-19 bringing sim racing into the fore, and with a lot of the glitterati in top tier motorsport, the likes of Fernando Alonso, Romain Grosjean, who's now got his own esports team, R8G Esports. You've got people like BMW getting involved with a lot of side of things. Ford having their own works team with Team Fordzilla. The plethora of teams that have come out, the amount of championships that have come out, the amount of online viewing and for a lot of people that don't know, Justin, you just so happen to be involved with Traction.gg, if memory serves me correctly.
Yep. Yeah. So that's who I'm with. Currently have been since last January. So a little over a year now, actually. Just recently celebrated my 1-year anniversary. And it's just about the best job that a fan of motorsport and video games can possibly get. Because I get to cover all kinds of stuff, doing social media, community management, stuff like that. Different people at Traction have a bit more speciality, they're a bit more focused on certain sims or what have you. But being on the social media side, obviously, I get to, share every single piece of news that comes through, from Mario Kart to Forza to iRacing and R Factor. And it's been an absolute pleasure, and I have no intentions of leaving anytime soon.
Really, really good to hear. So the big question is, how did you get involved with commentary, and who helped you get involved, more to the fact?
So I would say the person that actually played the biggest role in getting me involved in commentary was Fizzy Fan, Canute from Apex Online Racing. He's no longer involved these days. He's got a very busy personal life and all that kind of stuff. But he was the one, Fizzy Fan, who many people will know if they watched the Apex Racing League or Apex Online Racing Xbox highlights from the F1 leagues that they used to do with the likes of XBATG and those sorts. He was the one that picked up one of my personal channel videos. I had a YouTube channel that I started with my friend Miko, who I just happened to get paired with in my first season of league racing ever that I ever did. Randomly got paired with him, and he said, "Hey, do you want to start a YouTube channel? We could post our recordings of our races and stuff like that." And I said, "Sure, yeah, let's do it." And we started taking it a little bit more seriously, doing some commentary, adding a bit of editing, and stuff like that. And Fizzy happened to catch one of them because he was running ARL or AOR as it was at the time. And these videos were of races that were happening in split 2. So it wasn't the top split, but it was split 2. But essentially, you could kind of think of me as the split 2 commentator at the time, but very unofficially the split 2 commentator. And it was Rapid Scorpion that stepped down at the time. He ended up having
that handle sounds familiar. Mr. Scott Woodwiss, of course. He's definitely going to be someone I've got to get on this show. Mr. Woodwiss, you have been warned.
Rapid Scorpion was the one who he became too busy with real life commentary and stuff like that. So it was good circumstances that he was parting with ARL. And I very much was just brought in on a temporary basis. I was just using a USB headset at the time to do the commentaries. It really wasn't anything that great. Quality wasn't that good, but I guess Fizzy saw something in me or heard something in me, as the case might be, and decided to give me a go. And I performed well enough in the first couple of races that the position became permanent, and the rest is history, as they say.
Indeed. Now, one of the things that we try and give you a little bit of an insight to is funny moments. Now, I know you've probably got a few that you can tell me about, but I just so happened and it can be anything random. Now, I've gone to Twitter for this, and it's actually your bio, Justin.
Okay.
Sergio's greatest fan. Yeah. Please tell us, is this about Checo Perez, the man, the myth, the legend, partnering Max Verstappen at Red Bull by any chance?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And that goes all the way back to that 2012 Australian Grand Prix. I didn't immediately become a fan of Sergio Perez necessarily that day, but what I did become a fan of was Sauber, because I thought Sauber was just the bee's knees, just super duper cool. They were so different from any other F1 team. So many teams were based in Italy or England, and here they were based in a totally different country, still Europe, so not that crazy, but with neither of their drivers being European either, which again I thought was incredibly interesting. They had a North American and an Asian driver, so they had Sergio Perez and Kabui Kobayashi, and I just thought they were super duper cool. And then the very next race was Malaysia, where Sergio Perez picked up his very first podium ever. That was the one where he was chasing down Alonso, and the Ferrari team was crying at the end, and the Sauber team is crying at the end. And it was one of the most emotional races I've ever seen in Formula One. So much tears at the end. And that was the day that I became a Sergio Perez fan. So I was already, kind of a fan coming into that race, but I just thought he was the coolest person ever, coming out of nowhere. And the more I learned about him too, the more I liked him. He really kind of fought uphill to get into European karting. He moved away from his family by himself, moved to Europe, and threw his entire life at this dream. And it paid off for him, and he had a little bit of sponsorship money from the phone company in Mexico.
Telmex, I think it is. Yeah, Telmex.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. He had a little bit of funding and stuff like that. So sometimes he would get labeled a pay driver and stuff like that, but he just kept getting podiums after podiums after podiums. 2012, 2014, 15, 16. I think there might have been a year off, but then 18, 19, and then of course the race win in 2020.
Yeah.
Which that's when things reached fever pitch for me.
And then, of course, he made the switch to partner up with Max Verstappen at the team now known as Oracle Red Bull Racing, thanks to the title partnership. And I think also Bybit have just come on board as a blockchain company so Red Bull Racing are doing pretty well. And I still remember when Checo was on that podium, and I cannot believe how different he looks now to how babyface he looked back then, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's completely different guy, but it's amazing to see how he's grown, how he's evolved throughout the sport, to watch him go from being that rookie, because of course, when I started watching in 2012, it was only his second season, if I remember correctly. I believe his rookie season was 2011. So I didn't quite catch him in his very first year, but he was still very rookie-ish at the time. He certainly felt like a rookie compared to much of the grid at the time, with how many champions were racing at the time in 2012 with Michael and Kimi and Fernando and whatnot. So it was great to watch him grow. It really was.
Apart from Checo, are there any other drivers that really tick the box for you? You know, someone that you can sort of support and get behind.
Currently on the grid?
Yeah.
On the grid. Ooh,
apart from Checo, we've already talked about the Mexican matador himself, who, you know, picked up that win after having an incident with both Max and Charles Leclerc in that very first lap, when we saw that Mercedes drop the ball with both Valtteri and George, and then all of a sudden, Racing Point come out of the bag.
A pink car wins the race.
A car wins a Formula One Grand Prix. Who'd have thunk that at the end of what was a very, very difficult season? And of course, it was the race when Lewis Hamilton was out of the race because of contracting COVID-19. So in steps a very, very young George Russell, who was, you know, in his second year with Williams. Gets in wearing a shoe size too small in a seat that doesn't fit him, and still has the absolute audacity and the balls to put it around the outside of Valtteri Bottas, of all people, in the same machinery at the same track. Let's expand that remit rather than sort of just looking at it from Formula One. Are there any other drivers that you follow in other motorsports, when you have time, of course, that really tick a similar sort of box to Checo?
Well, I'm a big fan of Alexander Rossi. He was the next great American hope in Formula One. He was, I certainly think, the best American F1 driver for quite some time. I didn't really rate Scott Speed all that much. I didn't watch him during his time, so maybe I don't have the right lens for him or something like that. I've only really known him by going back and watching F1 season reviews, which is how I kind of got caught up. Once I really got into the sport, I went back and I watched all of them, going all the way back to the 70s. I wasn't a huge fan. I love Mario, obviously. Mario Andretti is an American hero. You cannot ignore Mario Andretti. But I really felt like Rossi was, here he comes, an American with an Italian last name, into Formula One in the mid 2010s. And I was really optimistic. I was really hopeful that he could parlay that Manor Marussia seat, I believe it was at the time, into something a little bit more permanent, to a slightly higher, a midfield team, something like that. Unfortunately, that ended up not turning out for him, but he made the switch to IndyCar. He won the Indy 500. He's had incredible success over there. He's one of the kind of highlight drivers, really, one of the hero drivers, I feel, of IndyCar, and just a great ambassador for single-seater racers that come from America. I really do think. But also, I do have to give a shout out. I would say the racing driver that I kind of fell in love with before Sergio, before 2012, before any of that stuff, was Mika Hakkinen. I always had absolutely massive respect for Mika. And it's not just his driving, it's not just what he does out on track, but he was like one of the good guys, one of the nice guys, one of the gentleman racers, that would absolutely annihilate you out on track, but then shake your hand and take you to dinner and all that kind of great stuff. One of the best F1 drivers of all time, one of the best people, I think.
I still remember actually interviewing Alexander Rossi quite a few years back when he was still running in Formula Renault 3.5s over here in Europe.
Oh, okay.
And that was just before, I think getting on the cusp of possibly getting into Formula One. I remember Alexander was running in Formula BMW. He got to the World Finals at one point in the early
Did a bit of
2000s.
GP2, I remember as well.
He did indeed. But yeah, some really good names to sort of check there. Have you ever been starstruck by a racing driver in your life?
So like in real life, yeah. I actually met Sergio Perez at a mall one time. My girlfriend was working at a mall, gives me a call out of the blue. I'm sitting there. I can't remember if I was working, if I was off or whatever, but she calls me and she says Sergio Perez is in the mall, because his family is from the area, is from Texas. A lot of his family lives in Texas. This was just after the U.S. Grand Prix. I want to say 2015 U.S. Grand Prix. I ran down there, or I drove down there, but I got there as quick as I possibly could, while still being as safe on the road as possible, for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, got there as quick as I could. Had my my book from that I got from the track, from the U.S. Grand Prix. I had a marker, and I figured, she told me on the phone, she was like, oh, he's near the food court, she's guiding me to him. And I see him and I go over to him and I'm thinking in my head, all right, this is probably a situation where I can either ask for an autograph or a picture, not both. It would probably be a bit too much. I don't want to be rude. He's here with family and stuff, he's just trying to enjoy his time off and whatnot. So I very nervously approached him and just said, excuse me, Sergio, would you sign this for me? And he said, yeah, sure. And he signs it and he hands it back to me. And I said, thank you. Good luck. I think it was, it might've been Mexico that was up next. Maybe it wasn't maybe it was 2017, but I wished him luck in whatever race was coming up next, and scurried off with my autograph. And yeah, I didn't say anything else to him. That was the entire interaction.
And that just goes to show that when you get starstruck by a fan, starstruck as a fan of a particular racing driver, you completely forget part of the conversation you actually had with said person.
Yes.
And that is very much like a funny moment, obviously, which is actually quite nicely segued into this part of the conversation. Justin, do you have any commentary idols? Are there any particular announcers, either stateside or globally, that have really sort of motivated you to strive to be the best that you can be as a commentator, but also bring your own personal style to how you come across?
I don't have one in particular, but I would say I have a couple who I really quite like. I really like James Allen. Again, I kind of missed out on his whole era of F1, so I only know him from the season reviews and stuff like that. And I know he's much more on the administrative managerial side of motorsport these days, rather than calling the action. But I always thought he had just a really good kind of tone to him. I guess you could say I kind of pick different strengths here and there. I always thought Crofty, I know he gets a lot of stick. I know people will but I think part of that is just because how many people see and hear Crofty these days, and every commentator makes mistakes from time to time. I think people just maybe jump on him a little bit too much, but I think he has an incredible ability to match the intensity of what's happening in a race. He doesn't just shout at you constantly. He doesn't have that kind of style where he's just yelling and faking the excitement the whole time.
Yeah.
But similarly, when the action gets going on track, he really does do a really good job of matching that. And I think in particular, him and Brundle are one of the greatest pairings of all time, of voice to knowledge and experience, that extremely effective combination that they have. So yeah, I would say, strangely enough, yeah, it is two British guys actually that I kind of look up to when it comes to commentary. On the esports side of things, I love Chris Buxton, my longtime co-commentator. Kieran McGinley is fantastic as well. I've always had a real soft spot for Matty G as well. He's a bit more of a kind of color commentator, almost an entertainer almost, rather than a commentator. But he has an incredible ability to really engage the audience, and he comes up with phrasing and stuff like that just really impresses me, and he's really good on the fly. He doesn't get as much commentary duties these days, doing the F1 esports. He's more of a presenter, pre-show, post-race, that kind of stuff. But when he does get to go on the mic, I always enjoy his stuff.
We're talking about Maddie Gallagher, aren't we, by any chance? Are we? But
Yep.
the one and the
Yep.
same from WTF1. Yeah, I recognized the handle straight away. So for people wondering about how I know about certain handles, the thing is that at the end of the day, I've made this crossover like a lot of real life commentators have, like David Addison, Jack Nichols. A lot of us, when we were not able to go trackside, we were with our headsets at home on either our PCs or our Macintoshes, and actually getting live feeds pumped to us from what was going on the track.
Jack Nichols is another good one, by the way.
Exactly.
Now that you've reminded me, I want to add him to the list too.
Yeah, and you know what? I really like the dynamic between him and Dario Franchitti. You know,
Yes.
a man that's multi-time IndyCar champion, multi-time Indy 500 champion, and you know, he's now as a color commentator, along with the man, the myth, the legend, the one, the only, Mr. Bob Varsha. And it's so nice. Bob Varsha, I have to completely admit here, out of all the commentators that I hear from stateside, in terms of the gravitas, Bob is one of those people that really adds a nice dynamic. Lee Diffie does a really good job in IndyCar, and he's an Aussie transplant. You know, it's funny how all these people get picked and put over everywhere, and this, that, the other. It's great. There's a hodgepodge, so to speak, of commentators globally, and it doesn't matter, you know, which is why I'm currently in Andalusia in Spain whilst we're recording this episode. So I'm on Central European time as opposed to GMT. So we've been conversing. Oh yeah, like 9:30 GMT. Yeah, that's fine. And I realized, hang on, that's 10:30 European time. Favorite moments in commentary. Now, Justin, there's something I do with every single guest. Favorite moments in commentary, but it's the first three that pop into your head right now. What are your favorite moments, 3 moments from commentary that you can think of right now?
From my commentaries or from anybody?
Yours in particular.
From mine specifically, the first one that immediately comes to mind was I did a virtual Race of Champions event for Apex Online Racing, which is the league that I mentioned earlier that I kind of got my start with. And it was a very long event. I think the broadcasts were 5 or 6 hours, and it was 3 days in a row. And I was working full time at the time. So I would get off work, having just done 8-9 hour shifts or whatever, and just straight onto the mic. Oftentimes still, you know, like in work clothes and stuff like that, chugging down caffeine just to keep the energy levels up as much as I can. And there was one driver in particular that was really kind of running away with it, and it was really looking like he was just going to win it quite easily by a fairly comfortable margin. And it was a bracket system, so you know, head to head, just like Race of Champions, and then the two drivers meet in the final. And the other driver that met this driver that was doing so well, his name was Rival. The other driver that faced up against Rival ended up being Jeroen Kvekel, who I was race engineer for in Formula Sim Racing, FSR. And he was also the organizer of the whole Race of Champions and stuff like that. So he didn't have quite as much practice as some of the other drivers. He was quite busy organizing everything and all that kind of stuff. But he nonetheless managed to make it to the final round where he faced off against Rival. And it was a best of 7. And I believe the first 3 rounds, change of car every time, same track every time, but change of vehicle for each round. And the first 3 went to Rival rather predictably. You know, again, we kind of predicted this was going to happen. He just seemed to have some incredible pace around the track. And then we got to the 4th race in the final, and Jeroen Kvekel ended up winning the race. And I did in fact start crying. I broke down because it was such a come from behind kind of underdog story that it really touched me. And especially because I knew Jeroen on a personal level. And because I was so tired, you know, it had been a long week. We're, excuse me, we're on the 3rd and final day. And finally, somebody beats Rival, and it happens to be Jeroen. And in the end, Rival won. You know, the very next round, the 5th round, he got his 4th win out of in the best of 7, won the championship. It was all over. But Jeroen gave us that brief moment where we thought maybe it could go down to the very bitter end, and that was one of my favorite moments of all time, I have to say.
Yeah, so let's come on to the next one that you can think of straight off the bat. I'm sure there's probably quite a few that you can think of, but we'll go with another two, and we'll call it quits on that one, shall we?
Probably F1 esports, the first season. I don't remember the exact drivers that were involved, but it was the PC side of F1 esports. It was the feeder series, to get into the main thing, which is what I do now. I do the F1 esports challengers, which is you can't get into pro series without going to challengers. It's sort of like the F2 or some sort of feeder series.
Yeah.
But back in 2017, the F1 esports was the feeder series was actually being run. Once again, they're getting a lot of mentions here during this, but it was being run by Apex Online Racing. And I just so happened to be doing the PC side, I believe with Chris Buxton, actually, with King Kodiak. And there was a come from behind winner. I believe it was Ycom's. Oh God, his name was Chris. I can't remember his last name, but his username was Ycom's. And he had this amazing come from behind victory in a McLaren. And at the time, McLaren was not doing so good. It was almost a joke to everybody, like, oh God, this McLaren, is actually doing well. Because this was the days of like GP2 engine, GP2, and rough times McLaren was going through at the time.
Fernando Alonso on a deck chair at Interlagos is a very, very distinct memory, and also getting behind the camera once his car had broken down in free practice, and so he decided to get behind the. Oh yes, I still remember. The following year when they went on the summer break, and you had see you after the summer break, and there's Fernando in a deck chair. You literally they've taken the meme to the nth degree. There.
And so there was a lot of people in chat saying that, like, LOL, a McLaren winning and all of that kind of stuff. But I just remember the final couple of laps as he charged through the field. It felt like Chris and I were just firing on all cylinders. And that's why this is up there at the top for me, because it's not just my moment. It's Chris's moment as well. It felt like, and this might be one thing that only commentators can truly understand. But every once in a while, you have moments where you can't quite think of the right word, or you're stalling for time, or whatever the case might be. Things just aren't going exactly as you imagine them in your head. But for that couple of laps, everything did go exactly as I imagined them in my head, from my side, from Chris's side, from the driver's side as well, the driving standards. And it was just like that perfect moment where the racing and the commentary and the camera angles and just everything met together to form this perfect 2 or 3 minutes of racing and commentary, that it's really stuck with me. It's not stuck with me well enough to where I can remember Chris's last name right now, and he'll probably hate me if he hears this. But
I'm sure he won't hold a grudge against you on that one, Justin.
So let's see. What would be the next one?
Which is your last one before I forget.
Yep. So. I have to be very careful about this one. I have to make sure that I'm not forgetting anything in particular. It might be when I was called upon at Volace, because I did a stint at Volace as well, doing their social media for a little less than a year, I think it was, in 2019. And they called me in to do their Squad Sprint series.
I remember that. Yes, I remember that.
Squad Sprint this was before COVID, and this was one of the biggest, grids of, this was a star-studded event by 2019 standards. This was about as big as it got. And I remember for this one in particular, it was a solo commentary. And I remember I was stepping in for somebody. It might have been Ginger Andy, in fact, that I was stepping in for. And he was an absolute fan favorite, so huge shoes to fill, and inexperienced, middle of the season. And I'm kind of taking over for this beloved commentator and it really tough. And I think somebody else, I don't remember who, but I think somebody else had attempted to fill his shoes the race before, and it hadn't gone quite as well, and it hadn't gone to plan, which is why they had reached out to me for whatever reason. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And it was a recorded thing, and it was a solo commentary as well, which could be very difficult. Again, for commentators who are listening, they already know the struggle of solo commentary.
Oh, I know that firsthand because I'm here. I'm the only commentator. I've done 18 races today at the point of recording this episode. It is tough. You're filling time. I've also had a red flag stoppage today. We've had a medical.
Oof.
So the thing is that even in sim racing, when you have a server go down, you're expected to fill time. With the red flag in karting, one of the things that I do, and it's just out of courtesy, I just let them get on with the business at hand and just saying, we'll give you updates as soon as we know anything. Please bear with us. We are slightly delayed, which is, in some respects, the right thing to do. And as you say, solo commentary, incredibly hard on your own, but I've done 5 years. This is now my 5th season of commentary in Europe as a karting commentator. And it has gotten easier, but there's still always that test of trying to give people all the relevant information. And once myself and Justin have finished this call, I will be doing more research, probably until about midnight local time here in Andalusia before I head to the track at 7:30 tomorrow morning.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds pretty intense. Before, because you got stuff before and after and all that. I mean,
exactly.
Again, the solo commentary alone by itself, that is already enough of a burden, because it's not easy. I've heard in F1 esports, Alex Jakes has done solo commentary as well. I didn't list him as like a hero or whatever, but I feel like that's because he's sort of new to me. But he's definitely one of the, I think, rising stars of commentary at the moment. And even I've heard him, struggle a little bit with some solo commentary doing F1 esports in the past before. It's a tough thing to do, to have to essentially kind of play both roles and to talk nonstop. It can be quite draining on your voice, and your creativity gets absolutely drained as well. Every fancy word that you could think of gets used up in the first half hour or something like that.
It does. So, but like you were saying, with regards to the squad sprint for Veloce.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it was pre-recorded, and it was only 20 minutes long, but because it was pre-recorded, it was, action after action after action, no downtime whatsoever, really high standards as well. And it was a difficult kind of feel to have. They wanted a little bit of a comedy to it, a little light, but at the same time put on the racing commentary voice and all that kind of stuff. So it was a very difficult project, but the feedback was fantastic. And I think that was one of the most rewarding commentaries that I ever did, just because it was so difficult to fill those shoes. And in the end, the comments actually were really, really positive, because I did go, and I checked it out, and I wanted to see what people thought of my commentary after that one. And thankfully, most of them anyway, were very, very positive comments. Because that's another thing you have to deal with as a commentator, is learning to deal with people who don't like you as a commentator, because you can't please everybody.
Exactly. And the thing is I think a lot of people that are haters, and as they say, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yep.
The old adage, which I tend to use. And I always am of the opinion that if you haven't got anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. It makes for a better place on social media. And that's my 2 cents on that one. Final question, Justin. And this is where things get a little bit interesting, because I'm going to ask you a question, and I will give you my response to what you've said. And it's quite a good one. It makes my guests think here on Commentator's Corner.
Okay.
So if there was no glass ceiling when it comes to budget, now this is whatever your mind desires. If you had the choice of either a street car or a race car and a circuit that you would get behind the wheel and go for a good old Sunday drive, what would you pick?
So the circuit is an easy one. I'm a massive fan of the Nordschleife. Easy choice there. Car is a tougher one. And I'm going to say the reason is because my dream car, my bedroom poster car, is a McLaren F1 LM edition. the kind that Lewis
Oh.
Hamilton didn't quite get by winning that second championship with McLaren.
Yes.
But the one that he would have gotten essentially. But that car at the Nordschleife does sound like a bit of a handful.
Yeah.
Ooh, I think I might actually go for a Shelby Cobra at the Nordschleife.
Oh.
An actual Shelby Cobra. And I think I would kind of take it easy. You know what I mean? I wouldn't push too hard. I would just soak in the experience, top down, listening to that V8, wind in my beard, I guess, as the case might be.
Yeah, true, because it's a rag top. Well, it doesn't really have a rag top on it. It's just basically windscreen and nothing above your head. So if you get pelted down with rain or hail, you're screwed either way.
Not the safest vehicle in the world either,
True.
which is again why I'd probably take it easy on the lap.
Yeah, and especially you don't want to do what Jan Mardenborough unfortunately had the misfortune of when he was testing a SNGT on Ismo GT3 and it went off at Flugplatz, and they then decided to trim the top speeds down to 250 kilometers per hour over that particular part of the circuit. But I have to say, very, very loving the retro choice, and also the choice of circuit as well. So I'm going to go. My response now is what I would pick, and I'm going to use the car generation as that sort of focal point. And I think you might like this because you're bringing a bit of classic Americana by the man, the myth, the late legend that is Carroll Shelby, and bringing it to the toughest circuit known to man, the Nordschleife, 20.5 kilometers in length. Well, mentioning Carroll Shelby, I'm going to say the car that Carroll Shelby won the 24 Hours of Le Mans in, and he raced for Aston Martin at that point, and I would take that car around the Circuit de la Sarthe.
Oh, yes. Another very long lap where you get to savor it.
Not quite 20.5 kilometers, but I do know the length. It's 13.868 kilometers, which is about 8.5 miles. And I would definitely take that down the Mulsanne as fast as I could possibly, bravely, with a big set of cojones, along for good measure, down the Mulsanne and into the Hunaudière. So I have to say, I applaud you. You know what? You nearly made it 3 guests in a row that said the McLaren F1. My
Really?
2 previous guests have said the McLaren F1, and I'm so glad you brought a bit of Americana to Commentator's Corner. Don't forget, if you want to follow Justin on Twitter, his link is in the description down below, along with the website address for traction.gd. And also some links reference F1 Esports Challenges. So if you want to have a watch with Justin and Kieran, go along and enjoy the show. Justin, thank you ever so much for taking the time out of your schedule to have a chat with me here on Commentator's Corner. It's been a pleasure having you.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I had an absolute blast. I wasn't sure what to expect going into it, but I had a lot of fun answering those questions, actually.
So thanks a lot to Justin Sutton, my guest here on episode 8 of Commentator's Corner. We'll be coming back very, very soon with episode 9 with another very special guest. Until then, stay safe, enjoy your racing, and we'll see you very soon.